Well, TV fans, the right use of sound is essential for pulling off the fast-talking world of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I'm very excited to sit down with two of the men who make that happen for the show, Bochar, the re-recording mixer and supervising sound editor, and Mathew Price, the production sound mixer. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. You know, one thing that I think a lot of us associate with this series is the dialogue is so fast-paced and just starts flying, which I would imagine if you're working on sound, there's quite a process to get that to sound right and all the dialogue to land. So I'm curious, do you feel like you have it down to a science now of how to get that dialogue to land because you've been working on this for a few seasons, or is it still something you have to sort of figure out day to day?
Me? You, Ron? Me.
Yeah, go ahead. Start with you.
All right. Well, I'm the first step in the dialogue recording process, obviously, and we're very lucky on Maisel that we get to do a lot of rehearsals usually. So there's a lot of camera choreography working with the actors, especially with these long these single Steadicam shots where we do a whole scene in one shot. So it gives me a chance to put it all together. But yeah, they talk fast, and it's challenging that way. The other 2 points about the show that makes it a lot easier for me is that they stick to the script, every comma, pause, period, every word, and that all the actors have wonderful voices. So I'm not digging to pull their voices out from the background.
And it's also, a period piece where we were in the 1950s, but now we're in 1960. Ron, for instance, we'll pass it to you. Is there anything you work off of, like as a reference, to make sure you get that sound right? How do you approach it with the period setting in mind?
Well, it's kind of interesting on that. We had a discussion when we first started the series, and Amy and Dan, while they wanted to be rooted in the period, at the same time, we weren't going to lock ourselves in. We wanted to have the best sound that we possibly could, and we wanted to have the best dialogue that we could. So we didn't want to end up in a situation where we were constantly striving to create that 60s sound out of a microphone. We were going more for the clarity that we possibly could. So, any vehicles that we have, any ambiances, any backgrounds, we pretty much stick to the time period, but it hasn't really affected us on how we present the dialogue.
And is there anything like, when you're thinking of something challenging, if you get a script for this show, do you sort of suddenly, immediately upon reading it, know what scenes are going to pose a challenge to you and that you're going to have to figure out some new way of attacking it?
Yeah. It's where will I begin? Every script, every episode has at least one scene that's just, you read it and you go, okay, you really have to think about it. We have a lot of discussions ahead of time. I brought this up before in season 3 specifically, since we're talking about that, the USO scene at the very beginning in episode 1 of season 3 was, we had to figure out how to actually get the dialogue over 500 feet of a moving Jeep that's exposed. And then as they come into the room, into the USO, there's dialogue, and then they go up on the stage. And in the meantime, you have 20 people tap dancing. You have an MC, you have a music, and she goes on stage, and then she comes off. It's just like 7-8 minutes, and it never ends. And so we had all kinds of redundant systems to make it work because we knew they'd get out of range. And I have these recording transmitters made by Zaxcom, and I just hit record, and that was plan C, and that's what we wound up using to preserve the dialogue of the open Jeep.
Yeah.
And then we had other episodes like the Miami episode 305 where Amy Sherman-Palladino wanted to record this jazz combo live on set during the scene. Things like that are always a rather large amount of discussion ahead of time.
Yeah. I'm curious both of your takes. There's one particular moment that I feel like encapsulates a lot of like the long takes you were talking about as well as the music. That music is a huge part of this series, which was there's this take through the episode, It's Comedy or Cabbage, where the camera follows this singer and band through like this tiki bar, through the bamboo hallways, past dancers. There's music the whole time, and then they finally land on Midge and Lenny, which just seems so incredibly complicated for both of your jobs. So I'm just wondering, like, you know, what is the setup for that? Because I imagine you can't have a standard boom setup following a long shot like that, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Ron?
Well, I don't know how you shot that. I mean, from my end, I got it as, you know, nice, clean music track. Because again, we were emphasizing more the music in the scene than we were reaching toward any kind of reality. We didn't Foley it. We didn't put in any ambience. We didn't put in any extra wallas. We just played it almost like a music video in a way, where we let the music carry the whole scene. Didn't emphasize different instruments if we saw them. We played it straight the way it was planning on being mixed. And that may be more of a nod toward the type of sound from that era that Amy wanted to try to get. That was her focus for that entire shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, on set, it was straight playback into the room with speakers for that whole movement. So there was really no recording. We had a mic open just as reference track. And then when they get into the part where there's a transition to a slower piece, when they start dancing together and there's dialogue at the same time, I believe at that point they might have had earwigs in, and we're playing the music so they can move to the music without it being over the dialogue. We might have had like a low frequency thumper for rhythm, but I think they had earwigs, and that's how we got the dialogue clean. And it was only the two of them talking.
It's actually during that first piece, you end up on them at a table, and you know, the action moves past them, and then it comes in again from the other side. And you know, that was like the only time where we were able to have a little fun with the sound from the music point of view. Is I could pan the guy singing off, and then we could pan the guy coming back in again.
Right.
And we had a nice little hole then for that dialogue to take place in the middle. It was great.
Yeah. Whenever there's dialogue, there's no music playing in the room because we have to get the dialogue clean. So we, as I said, we either use earwigs, you know, these little buds, so they can hear the music for motivation, especially if they're dancing, or a thump track, which is a low frequency thumper that each time to the music, but it could be cleaned up in post-production. Yeah. So you hear it in the room, but it's so low frequency, they just filter it out.
Right. And there's also a lot of music this season because Shai Baldwin became such a main part of this season, and he has this kind of retro Harry Belafonte vibe to his music. So what was the most important aspect of that and the biggest challenge to bring out for you in terms of creating that classic type of sound?
That's Ron again.
Well, music editor Annette did this amazing job to put him in sync. Because you know, the Shai you see is not the Shai that sings. There's someone else that Darius, right?
Darius, yeah,
is the primary singer. So I would get some wonderful clean track and have to make it feel as if it was real and live coming out of a guy who didn't sing it in the first place. So that always is a challenge. Every single one of those Shai moments had some challenge built into it. Annette is a whiz the way she's able to manipulate the material. And you know, there's times where some of Shai's singing is from other takes that they had done, and you know, just to make it look right in his mouth. And again, there's little tiny things we need to do to fix it to be able to make it feel as if it's coming from the stage, in the background, wherever he is on the stage, as well as the whole background singers and everybody in the band. You have to give it that feel of being very much alive. In many ways, the same way we have to do Midge when she's performing her comedy.
Mhm.
You add different levels of ambience depending on where the camera is. Also, if we're in the back of the room, it'll sound
Yeah.
different than if we're right in his face, right?
And in those cases, in all those performance pieces, because we have some separation, if the camera is doing some sweeping shot of the band, we can highlight the instruments that you're seeing at that moment just a tiny bit more, as if, again, there's a microphone on the camera following the band. And it just gives you that little extra sense of reality. You know, we don't have a whole ton of time in the mix to do all that, but we find we want to make the time.
Of course. Actually, not to take over, but I have a question for you, Ron. Do you have access to the multi-tracks? And do you emphasize different instruments when the camera's moving across? Do you do that in the mix?
On occasion, yeah. I don't have every single thing, but I think I pretty much have the way they've recorded it on the in the studio. So I'll have piano separate from a bass, and the guitars separate from the horn section. Most of the time, there's not bleed between them, so I can get some good clarity. A lot of times there is, depending as to where they recorded it. You know, the whole band in 308 with the Apollo, that was a whole other story. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Apollo, because that whole sequence there just seems like such a massive task and a massive undertaking, and certainly revolves around stand-up comedy as well, which is a huge component of the show. And the Apollo is a much larger venue than we're used to seeing Midge do the stand-up in. So what does that add to the process for recording sound and making sure that sounds like she's in this massive space?
Well, she's always wired.
Yeah.
Rachel Brosnan always gets a radio mic on her, and we have modified most of the vintage microphones, the shells, with modern electronics. We use these Shure lavaliers that they put into these old-looking microphones, so the quality is really good. And I tend to use that as my primary microphone when they're doing live performance. But the space is the space. I personally like the sound of a space. I like recording in churches, with all that ambience, because I think the space tells so much of the story. But it's pretty tightly recorded when they do performances, because I want Ron to have as much flexibility in terms of adding as much or as little ambience as he needs to add to make it work. But also the real issues are always, how do you keep the audience under some level of control so that it doesn't bleed too much into the actual recording of the vocals, either the comedy stand-up or any singing, which again, most of that was playback, so not so much of an issue. So, we do it with the audience full out, like laughing and throwing stuff out. And then we'll try to get some passes where it's just the performers, like Rachel on stage without anyone reacting. But that usually doesn't have the same energy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Rachel's gotten really good at playing it off that way, though.
And the comedy routines are it's usually either Amy Sherman-Palladino's words or Dan Palladino's words. And I'm wondering, because they just have their hands in so many parts of this show, how hands-on are they with you in terms of like what they want from the sound quality in those stand-up bits?
Well, they're all over that. We take a lot of guidance from Amy and Dan. Amy and Dan give us a certain amount of freedom, but this is the third season already, so we kind of know what their expectations are going to be, and it's always about clarity. Clarity is always the number one thing for us. So I know that I have to fit a space, and Amy and Dan are kind enough to let me do my first pass to present that kind of space. But where the laughs hit, where the pauses happen in the audience, where the audience changes both emotionally or to just the women in the room or just the guys in the room, that's a lot of Amy. She's very, very specific about when certain things should happen. So we do a pass, and then we do at least two other revisions based on playbacks for them. so that we get it the way Amy wants it. And, in truth, the hardest thing is always dealing with those moments where, Midge is close to flopping or not being right on. It's those uncomfortable bits that are the hardest things to work out timing for. And we take a lot of guidance from Amy on that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to touch on your awards history before we finish our conversation, because I think a lot of people associate, when they hear sound in television or film, they think action movies, gunfights, explosions, and you see that as evidence at the Emmys, like in the sound mixing category. You were both nominated last year for Mrs. Maisel, but you were the only comedy series in that lineup, and it's often dominated by dramas. I think I looked, and you were the first comedy series in there since Glee in 2011. So I'm curious, do you find that when you discuss your work, people do associate with dramas, and what did it feel like to sort of break into that category as the one comedy there? Well,
we keep telling Amy to put dancing, dinosaurs or something in every episode, and maybe we'll get a better chance too. So,
a lot of it's the vagaries of the category. It's 1 hour. 1 hour. It's not a drama or a comedy. It's like 1 hour, scripted narrative show. So, yeah, comedy doesn't get the same respect that way as drama does. But at the same time, there aren't a lot of 1 hour comedies.
No.
They're out there. I don't know of any, actually. I mean, maybe the only one. So, what are you going to do?
And, you have to admit, too, our dialogue in Mrs. Maisel, I mean, in many ways, those are our machine guns. That dialogue's coming at you hard and fast. The one thing that should be said is, those scripts that we work off of are sometimes 100 pages long, and they fit 50-minute shows, and very rarely are things cut out.
Right.
That's how fast they're talking.
A lot of words.
A lot of words.
But yeah, it is challenging. I know certainly in the film side of things for Academy Awards, definitely dialogue-driven drama does not get the same kind of recognition award season as big effects do.
Right. Well, we'll certainly hope for more continued recognition of your machine gun words and dialogue, because it's a wonderful job. So, well, best of luck to you both, and everyone who's watching. Please subscribe to Gold Derby. Make sure you keep up to date with us throughout Emmy season. And Ron and Matthew, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.